All right, recording is started. This is the Network Plumbing Working Group meeting for Thursday, June 7th, 2018. I will paste the agenda doc into the Zoom chat just in case people don't have it. There it is. Okay, spec updates from last time. I updated MAC request, IP request, and interface request in the spec to clarify exactly how those should be treated. And let me try to share my screen really quick and I can just run over those. Can everybody see my screen?
Looks good.
Okay. So what I did is I filled out the IP request and MAC request and interface request. I actually also added some notes on what the type should be, just to try to tighten up spec stuff. And then notes about validation as well for all of these. For example, the key must have valid IPv4v6 addresses in them. And then notes on how the implementation should translate those into the CNI ARGs. The one thing that I did notice is that CNI ARGs are specified that they don't have to be, excuse me just a second. CNI ARGs don't have to be honored by plugins. And so if we want to make sure that IP request, MAC request are honored by the plugin, the implementation is going to have to verify after the call comes back that the MAC and IP were actually set. It doesn't actually need to, I think, go into the container's network namespace and figure that out, but I think it's probably enough just to check that the CNI result object has those set for the given interface. And then it provided examples here to kind of show how I thought it should get transformed. So hopefully that makes sense for people. Same thing for MAC request, except for the fact that MAC request is not currently in the conventions document. So we kind of have to make that up. But I think Tomofumi is working on adding a plugin that would honor that. And then last bit was interface request that was not present in the meeting last time, but we talked about it and thought it was a good idea. So I added a section for that. And that's basically, we just need to take interface request and make that the CNI if name environment variable when running that particular CNI config list. So that is it for those set of spec updates. There were one or two more changes, but they weren't really material. So, does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, that looks
okay.
Looks good to me.
All right.
I don't see a problem with it.
Okay, cool. So I think that was one of the bigger things for spec changes. The other big issue from last time was how to handle thick plugins for versioning and capabilities. And it turns out that, let me go up to that port. Well, I'll just switch to the agenda doc here. Yeah, so it turns out that just having the plugin name as part of the definition doesn't really work so well, because then we don't know what version the plugin is or what capabilities it has, so that we can pass host ports or those kinds of things to any of those plugins. So I think the best thing that I came up with was just removing spec.plugin entirely. That would work for some cases, but it doesn't really work for any plugins that are version larger than 0.1.0 of the CNI spec. And then instead you would write as a network interface, or excuse me, a network object creator. You would write a minimal JSON snippet, I guess, in the spec.config. And you just wouldn't put in any network name. And then we would expect the implementation to insert the network name into the JSON before calling any of the plugins in the that CNI config or config list. Did anybody else have any other ideas? Does this seem like are there better ways to do this?
Yeah, I have a question like, is there any example we can use it for the thick plugins? Do you have any examples actually? Like
Um,
I can go ahead and test it.
yeah, the one example that I was thinking of, might be something like OpenShift, where cube namespace is actually supposed to be a separate network. And so what would happen there is that then, I guess you would create a network object for every single namespace in Cube, and maybe an emission controller or something like that would then create a namespace object, or excuse me, a network object for every namespace when that namespace got added or deleted. And then basically you just forward on that name to OpenShift, and then OpenShift would do the right thing with it. That's
Hmm.
kind of the example. I mean, it would also be useful for plugins that define the networks outside of this system. If there's like some kind of controller that creates a cube network every time an external network is created. And then, that was
Hmm.
kind of the idea. Basically that, instead of carrying a ton of information about CNI stuff in the
Hmm.
CNI, then the external entity would be responsible for matching up the networks.
Okay,
Does that make
okay.
sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So one of the things is that during the demo, myself, Domo, and Doug don't know how to show this particular demo. That's why if you guys have any example, just pop it the link, then we can add it in the demo maybe.
Sure. One example I can think of was, I think in either the last sig-network meeting or two ago, or in one of the resource management meetings. I think it was Peter from Red Hat demoed his OVN plugin. And that was using device plugin and not Multis. But what happened there was that he had a daemon watching OVN, and whenever somebody added a logical switch to OVN, he created a new network in Kubernetes with the CRD. And then you could attach pods to that logical switch. So that might be one other example. And I
Okay,
can try to dig that up and send that around if you want.
okay.
Did anybody have other thoughts on this particular issue? I mean, if this doesn't seem too objectionable, I can go and make these changes in the spec, and we can try it out for a little bit, and then figure out if we want to go forward with it or if we want to change it.
I mean, it generally sounds good to me, but yeah, I say get it in the spec, and then we'll have the concrete place to add comments, etc., or see what it looks like in implementation.
Okay. I mean, I think what I'll end up doing is I'll end up changing the CRD bits and definition bits, and then add a section for thick plugins and stuff like that. There's some kind of section for that. So I'll figure it out. And then if people want to see the changes that have been made to the specification, you can do that pretty easily through Google Docs if you're not already aware of how that works. Unfortunately, Zoom is covering up the bits that I need. Maybe I can go do that. And I'm not signed in, so maybe maybe there we go. Nope, not signed in, so I can't do it. So anyway, sorry. But yeah, you can see the changes that have been made in the past day or something like that by going into the change view of Google Docs. So
Yeah, and I think you can grab even further older
yep.
pieces too. Yeah.
Yeah, so that should be a little easier to see what spec changes there are. All right, so I'll make those changes. Next one, Kural, you have an item for validation.
Yeah, so the validation part is like we're validating the network object when the information is passed by multis, and then we do the validation. I'm thinking of doing a watcher kind of thing in the ECD controller, which will watch the particular network objects. Whenever you do kubectl, it'll create the network object and need to do the validation or something. I don't know whether it's a feasible solution, but I see sometimes if people do some JSON issue with the config file, or they're doing some mistake in the config files, there is no way to do the validation part actually.
Yeah, and I did add, this doesn't directly address your issue, but there was a good point brought up in the comments on the doc. There is now the ability to validate custom resource definitions. And so I added some bits to the CRD specification itself to at least validate that the fields are correct. That obviously doesn't validate inside the field. So like the config, we wouldn't be able to validate the JSON string inside the spec.config property. But at least we are able to have Kubernetes automatically validate the object itself for us now.
That's a leap forward, because I have done that regularly where I've had the wrong fields. So to me, that's a good leap forward.
Yeah, and again, it's automatic. You just add a validate, not stanza, validate section or validation section to the bottom of the CRD definition YAML, and then kind of list the properties. So I added that to the document, section 3.1, if anybody cares to go check that out. But yeah, I don't know of any other good ways. You could do maybe an admission controller or something like that too, Corral, to see when that comes in and validate it and then reject it.
Yeah, I was looking for some kind of mechanism. I don't know whether the CRD has some kind of validation mechanism that we can specify that these fields should be JSON format or something.
Yeah, that's a good point. The Open API v3 schema stuff that Cube uses to validate, I don't believe has that capability to look that deeply into the fields. I could be completely wrong, but when I was looking at it, it looks like you can just validate the field type, so like string or integer or something like that. I mean, you can do like min, max, that kind of stuff, but I don't think you can go too much further in. So we may be stuck with a admission controller or something like that.
Okay, cool.
But I mean, once you have a thick plugin, for example, wouldn't that solve itself? Can't you just then implement a loop to watch the CRDs?
I guess the only downside there is just that you're not going to get immediate feedback at the CLI when you're dumping those in with like a kube control, create this thing or whatever, right? You'd have to go to another place.
Yep.
Sure.
But you could definitely get the output from it there, and it could give you a report saying like, oh, these aren't valid. So there's definitely something to that.
I just mean, compared to what we have today. So let's say if you have a CNI plugin with the wrong config, you wouldn't be able to find that out until you create a pod, right?
That is absolutely true. And then you're tailing kubelet logs for days trying to see what you did wrong.
Right. So we're not decreasing functionality is what I mean, right? So we're basically maintaining the same thing if we don't validate even, right?
So I have one concern about the once the thick plugin found that the user input the wrong network attachment YAML, but how we notify this information to users is the also challenging to me, because the thick plugin or other program is we could not put the standard error over the kube control output. So maybe we need to add the additional field in the to store the current status of network attachments, not the network status. Well, now we don't have this functionality yet, so but today, in the future, we should think about how we store the other, like the sig plugin or something like stuff. Let user know the this network attachment is okay, or some component causing the error or something like that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, the way that or the current state of affairs would be that the implementation like Multis or whatever would fail the entire pod network if one of them couldn't be attached, and it should ideally return some kind of error message that would then be sent to kubelet, and kubelet would put that into the pod events. So you could do kubectl describe pod foo, and it would show you, the specific error that Multis would return. But that's not, it doesn't work very well because there's not a lot of var information that's actually conveyed there. You basically just get the output of, a Golang error. So there's definitely room for improvement.
Yep.
Well, that kind of ties into the Corral's next point, which was logs. I think something that could help that quite a bit would also be logs from the implementation of this specification that would have more verbose information about what might be going wrong. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you mean with logs, Corral?
Yeah, so I was thinking that most of the time, whenever there is an error happens, right, we have to go to the kubelet logs and see the information. So it's not the ideal way, like each and every time you will go and see the output. If the IP address it's full, or the IP address is mismatching with the funnel network, sometimes the funnel will throw error, sometimes some other plugins will throw the error, the entire pod creation will be stopped in Multis. So I'm thinking whether we should have a proper kind of logs like the Multis can generate, like whatever currently it's generated by the cube logs. So which is easy to read for the users, so that they just can go there and see. So for this particular pod, when it's created, and what is the error statements the Multis is throwing out. So just for the debugging issues, it's not a high priority task, but I just need to put the idea, because CNI doesn't provide you any of these feature actually. Or this is something the CNI by default should have in the CNI libs. I don't know.
Yeah, it would be a good I think addition or PR to CNI, like libCNI and some of the other core bits and package for CNI, to have more logging information, so that like Multis or something else could maybe pass in some kind of log interface, and then CNI would direct its debug or info messages to that interface, and then Multis could do whatever it wanted with those, like write them out to disk or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the current capability of CNI with regard to logging? Does it write errors to std out? To std error or anything like that? Because it returns its output to std out, so it can't go there. Is there any? Is there any standard way or?
Yeah, there is a standard error structure. You can return a code and a message from the plugins, and so if the plugin has an error, it's expected to return that format. But they can also, I think, just write to std error, and then that gets picked up. But one of the other problems, though, is that there isn't really a lot of tracing inside libCNI itself, which is the CNI runtime reference library. And that's one place that we could use more logging in the CNI project upstream. Does that make sense?
Sure.
One question about the rows. So at that time, you're wondering that we could add some standard the config for logging file I mean that not the models. So once we add the log somewhere slash the variable cni.log or in the config file, we put not only the models, also the libcni or other CNI logs goes into the one file. Am I understanding correct?
Is that
You mean?
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I just trying to understand the question. You mean that it's not Maltese, it's generic CNI wants to generate the log? Is that the question?
So yes, so currently I'm just thinking about the implement some log functionality in the models. I mean that the models have additional fields for configuration. I mean the verbose log or something like that. And then I'm thinking about to put everything and the verbose logs in the this log file. But to the I'm so the missing the log functionality is not only the to models, also the libcni, because the currently we only use one standard error output, and then once we add the as the whole CNI, I mean not in the models or de facto standard. If we add the standard error config syntax in the CNI side, it could be the better. I mean, we also catch whole CNI logs. I mean, the libcni or other CNI out can send the log to the file. So maybe if possible, we could add the verbose log functionality in the CNI, not the network clumping working group document.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what Dan suggested. Basically, you need a way
Yeah.
for libcni to pass into the CNI
Yeah.
a log data structure, so you can direct your stuff to it.
Yeah. So this they goes to the CNI specification, not in the de facto standard of the multiple network attachments. Just a double check.
Yeah, I think it would definitely be worth bringing up in CNI itself. If you have any ideas about how it should work, I mean, first maybe raise an issue in the CNI project and say, this is something that we can work on and make better, and then dump any ideas you have in there, or even better, like PRs or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking. Yeah, Toma may be right because in the kubelet we use the CNI lib, right? So in this case, the kubelet will be alive the overall process. So whenever we pass information to the CNI lib could able to generate the logs. Because if you put it in multis each and every time it generates a logs whenever we invoke that. So that will be a lot of information actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you can implement that independently, right? You can implement your log independent of whether someone passes you a object for you to write to, right? So for example, you can by default log to system log or something. Yeah, so your log doesn't have to change. I do think I do agree, right? Your point is right. We should have logging in Motus, but you can just use a library, I think.
Okay.
And then you can expect someone will pass you this, where to log, right? Because that's the only question, isn't it? Like, is where do I write this log, right?
No, write the log and also the format out. The format you expecting like it's similar to the kubelet, something like that.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, you can use the same library or something. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. I'll put something in the doc, maybe try to come up with some ideas. Last week I was trying to do some prototype on that one. Then it stuck to me with a lot of information. Each and every time whenever I invoke multis, is throwing the log. So I was thinking it's too much information, whether it will be user friendly that anyone can read and understand the stuff. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. Maybe I can put my ideas in the documentation and people can comment it and we can make it in better shape.
It sounds good to me.
Me either.
All right. Last time on the agenda, Corral, you want to
Yeah,
talk about
so
POC?
yeah, so there are a lot of POCs. I was looking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 POCs. I was looking. Each and every POCs have a different kind of implementation of multiple networking. So I just need to get each member's view. Like, is that they also viewing like so each and every components can do multiple networking, and then it up to the user. They can pick up any pluggable models to implement. Or you guys saying that we should have some kind of unified way of doing multiple networking? Because whenever I talk with someone, they always ask this question, guys, this is like ABC options are there, which is the option you going to say? Like they ask me the suggestion, which is option you suggest. Then I always stump that okay, you, what is your recommend? I will generally ask what is your recommend. Then I will tell like, okay, this is your recommend, then you can use this option if this is your recommend. For example, if you want to use service load balancing endpoints, then I will say okay, network service mesh is a good option. So someone says I don't need services at all, I just need additional networking, it's a private network, then I will say okay, use the meta plugin or the reference implementation from the Kubernetes network 6. There is another use case which when the people said okay, I'm using the logical network as a resource, and how I do that. And there was two interesting POCs which I see it from the Red Hat is on the Kubetron, and next one is from John. I think he had also did some kind of work on the ritual logical networking. It's something similar to the device plugin implementation. And we also did something which is like a network plugin plus CNI. So CNI will communicate to the device plugin, get the information, pass it to the CNI. So we got like few feedbacks, but from both the resource management working group and also from the network sig group as well. So we are currently working on this. So when people ask me what is the solution, right, I usually confused like what I can tell actually, because there are so many solutions. You can do the solution much better in different pluggable models. So I just wondering like how you guys think that these POCs, and you guys think there is opportunity for the POCs to come forward and unify the solution?
Maybe a good idea is to, I mean, I'd love to see more of the people that have these different solutions get together, because I feel like what we've started here is like a really good building block towards making something standard. And then, because it's like, you know, with all the considerations we've had today between validation and logging and stuff like that, these are all really good considerations for the user experience. But kind of a really good part of what we're doing here is that it's going to improve user experience for people, right? So it's like they go to and learn a way to attach multiple networks to their pods, and the technology behind the scenes changes, but their experience of using it doesn't necessarily have to change, right? They just add the same annotations. So anyways, I feel like it'd be really good if we can get more of those people involved. And like, for example, like Kubetron, is that Petter's thing? I can't remember.
That is, yeah.
Okay, cool. So like he gets involved and talks about it. And at least personally, I have more to learn about network service mesh. But sometimes I look at that and I wonder. I'm like, oh, could they make a reference implementation of our spec with what they have going on? In theory, maybe they could be compatible with it as well. Stuff like that. But that's really all I've got there.
The one comment I've got on it generally is that so we're a vendor and we'll be selling to lots of different customers that will be running their. We're hoping to sell to lots of different customers who will be largely running their own Kubernetes systems. And the worry I've got is if it becomes too fragmented, if it's not consistent, then we'll be able to sell the same software to all these people. We'll be able to use the same Helm charts, all that kind of stuff. If everybody's using the same CRD specification and the same annotations and so on, well, that's fine. That alleviates that concern. But I am a bit concerned that it's all a bit too fragmented. The environments are going to differ in lots of subtle little ways. And in particular, the two that I'm most familiar with, the network service mesh, where I've done a bit of reading, and the proof of concept, which we've been playing with and trying out, those look very different to me. I am just worried about fragmentation and how long it's going to take before people say, well, these are the standard 2 or 3 things that you can do for multi-network.
Amen to that one, Peter. I certainly, like, some of my own motivation in being involved in these efforts is to not see this functionality become balkanized into like 80 different solutions. I'd really love it if people could come together to work on this for sure.
Yeah, I feel basically the same. I'm hoping that we can kind of at least create a version 1 base that people can start implementing with this. Maybe obviously not everybody's going to do it, but if we can kind of get some critical mass around the specification, and hopefully it works for at least 50 or 60 or something % of some of the use cases. And then we can just kind of build from there. Obviously, it's not going to work for everybody. It may not work for network service mesh use cases immediately, but once we've gotten to a point where it's out there and it's being used, we can definitely keep improving it to handle some of those use cases. And I think I see a lot of the same people on a lot of the same calls, sig-network and this call and some of the network service mesh stuff as well. So I think there's a lot of interaction going on. We just need to keep that up and make sure that we're all kind of plugged in.
Good call.
It seems we're out of agenda more or less, unless we want to keep talking about the other solutions and stuff. The last thing that I wanted to bring up was we're at the point where the spec activity is kind of winding down because we're pretty much solved all the outstanding issues. And the last one that is sort of near and dear to Mike's heart, at least, is network object name. We've kept kind of the network object called network because it's easy. We sort of know what it means, but it doesn't necessarily really represent what it actually is, which is a network attachment template or a network attachment description sort of thing. So maybe to push that forward a little bit, I will copy and paste the list of names that people have come up with for what the network object should be called to the top of the spec document. And then if people just want to go through that list and indicate if they have preferences, let's just kind of get to a shorter list of possible options for the network object name. So I don't necessarily think we should discuss it here, but let's kind of keep that offline and in the spec for the moment. And then we'll kind of circle around to that next meeting and maybe discuss something.
Thank you.
So does anybody have any other issues or things they'd like to bring up?
One minor thing from me. Just say I've been playing with the proof of concept, the one that Kural and Doug did it, right? Worked first time out the box, so well done, guys. Very pleased with that.
Yeah, including Tomo.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So well done,
Yep.
guys. It was very, very smooth. Went great. So I'm now going to, in true tradition, ask for a little bit more and say that the thing that we're interested in doing and what we're we're thinking about now is putting together a demo of some of our software, using it. I don't know exactly what that's going to involve. We're still at early days. But the one thing that we want to get working is DNS for the other networks. And the way we're probably going to do that is by just writing some code that will effectively fill in the endpoint objects by scanning the Kubernetes API, finding what endpoint objects exist and what IP addresses they have in the different networks, which is all fine. I was just curious if there was an expectation that there was going to be any further work in that area, if anyone else was going to be doing anything about setting up DNS and creating services for things that are not in the main network.
I haven't personally thought about that one very much, but I think you should definitely keep in touch and let us know how it goes. You know, I'm interested in your use case, and you know, kind of interested to see what's there, and maybe, you know, there's a potential to collaborate, you know, if it's appropriate to come in to, you know, the plugin itself, etc. You know, I'm not exactly sure yet, but yeah, definitely keep us posted at very least.
Cool. Sorry, go on, Dan. You were about to say something.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. The other thing that occurs to me is that DNS is not currently part of the status annotation on pods in the specification here. And that sounds like something you'd probably want. Since when you were saying like you were going to scan for the IP addresses and stuff, I assumed you were going to possibly scan for pod annotations, or were you going to pull that from some other look-aside area?
So I was simply thinking of scanning for pod annotations. Now, I know that won't scale, and I know that what I'm thinking of doing is frankly writing a bit of hacky Python code to get my demo working, so we've got something we can wave around, and then think about what the right way of doing it is. The hacky thing I'm going to do in the short term isn't very interesting. I'm thinking more about, well, what is the right answer going forward? I don't really have a good feel for what that would look like.
I'm with Dan. I think that thinking about adding that to the network status annotation, the results object, as I like to call it, might be worth thinking about, and it might be something that's like a little bit cleaner in the future to scan through. I'm not sure about the scale, and I know Mike has brought up some issues with scale in the results object previously, but anyways, definitely something to think about. But yeah, good luck with the demo. That's the way they got to start anyways. You got to start somewhere and just make it work for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I'll keep you guys posted. It'll take a little while, I think, before we've actually put very much more together than we currently have, which is very limited. But it's certainly from the point of view of our software, where we're getting a lot of our software running containers for the first time and putting together the infrastructure to manage it. So there's that on top of it, and then there's multi-network as well. So we're still in fairly early days, but I'm hoping that within the next couple of months we'll at least have a good handle on what we're doing, and multi-network will be a part of that.
And I added a note to the agenda to add DNS to the network attachment status annotation. I don't think there's any problem with that. The information's already present or should be present in the CNI result object, and so just kind of copying it in status annotation.
I was trying to say that.
Sorry, go on, Carl.
No, I was trying to say that one actually. The DNS status is just, it's tagged to me as well.
Yeah. The other thing we're interested in is services. We're not really interested necessarily in load balancing so much as headless services, at least being able to have some kind of DNS name for a group of objects. So you can find, if you've got a bunch of pods that are providing a service, Kubernetes does an excellent job of managing, here's a list of endpoints, here's a list of IP addresses, having something that maybe even manually maintains that list of endpoints for that particular service in a different network.
Yeah, so, I mean, you guys have been working on this for a while, and I seem to recall you had one of the proposals last year for how this stuff would integrate into the Cube API. So I'm really curious to see what you guys come up with and some of the stuff that you've been, working on for the past couple of months here, because I think this figuring out how all this stuff fits in is probably one of the next steps that this group should explore. So whatever research you're doing here would be excellent to hear when you've got some of that done.
Plus one. I think that service objects and how that stuff is tracked, et cetera, I think is super valuable and really good for the next versions, what we come up with, or whatever other goals we wind up coming up with together as a group.
How are you thinking of presenting the services and endpoints objects such that things that consume them are aware that they might be on different data planes?
I hadn't got as far as thinking about that at all, really. The only thing I was thinking of was if I can get a lookup of the IP address, we'll see that they're in a different subnet, they're in a different network. That'll be good enough for what we're doing. You're quite right. That does mean that you might be able to find a service that you can't access.
Yeah, I think that's
I don't know quite what you do at that point. You
right.
Presumably you put some annotations in there, but then if people aren't using annotations, then they'll still be able to find the service and yet get a bunch of IP addresses back that they can't get to. Does that matter? I'm not sure. It probably doesn't matter for a use case, but it feels wrong.
Yeah, so, and I think that was one of the sticking points with Upstream. And we kind of went around with a couple of options. One option was creating a completely new object called multi-network endpoint, or something like that, so that existing clients would not be exposed to endpoints they couldn't actually access, and only new clients that were updated to know about multi-network stuff would be able to see or would know to look for those. And I mean, that's still a viable option. The only downside of that is that there's a lot of logic in like the service controller and other places to manage endpoints and services, and that would have to potentially be duplicated for something like a multi-network endpoint.
Yeah.
And the other issue is that our software generally expects to do service discovery by DNS. So it'll do a DNS lookup, it gets some IP addresses back. If you start saying that if things go into DNS, then it almost doesn't matter how they get into there in terms of what services are in there. Anybody can find them. And if they don't go into DNS, we have to change all our software to look in a different place, and that becomes problematic too. So, yeah. So I'm not sure what any of the answers are here. But we will be playing around and trying to guess something, and I'll keep you guys informed.
Yeah, please do. Yep.
One of the advantage of using what Peter said, it's a kind of brownfield model, so you don't need to develop something Dan said, like creating our own CRD net endpoints, right? If you go for that point, we can do it, but it's completely a greenfield. You have to do everything on your own, which already Kubernetes is doing. So it kind of a very thick controller or something. The maintaining such a code is something like you maintaining Kubernetes. So that's kind of difficulties it has. The Peter said it's a kind of hacky way that you can easily achieve the stuff what you want to do. But the thing is that because I worked on this service endpoints, like I explored how to do this hacking. It's there is a lot of ways you can do the hackings actually within the Kubernetes services. So you can create your own endpoints as within the services, or you create the endpoints as using Python client Go or Kubernetes client Go APIs. So it's possible to do those stuff actually, the services as well, but it's quite hacky. And sometimes what happens is people usually say we are hacking the Kubernetes components. That's why I don't want to didn't did any POCs on that one. I think I trying to do that one, but I stopped doing that actually.
Yeah, I think adding from the point of view of the Kubernetes maintainers, I think they reasonably would argue that they shouldn't go into the main endpoint controller or anything. They'd probably be happy with, hey, we've written our own controller because we can now add our own controllers to Kubernetes, but writing our own controller is quite a lot of work, and it would end up duplicating a bunch of code that's already there, and I don't quite know how we'd manage that in a way that wouldn't just be a nightmare to manage.
Has anybody looked to see actually whether it really is a lot of code, or are we just assuming it's a lot of code?
I've done some investigation before, and it's a non-trivial amount. I mean, I can't say, lines of code. It didn't seem overwhelming, but it, I mean, it's basically endpoints controller, service controller, the proxy deals pretty heavily with services and endpoints, obviously. But a lot of us, may or may not be using kubeproxy for that functionality. So that's at least the bare minimum inside Kubernetes.
Yeah, I think the real problem is that it just starts bleeding over all over quickly. I could imagine that we define a more general kind of service that, for example, gives more control over what goes into DNS. But now you have to ask about, okay, people that are implementing other proxies. And actually, a lot of things use services. Actually, a lot of things use services, right? There's Ingress uses services. Yeah, so.
I mean, that said, it might be a good idea just to start, with if somebody wants to look into the multi-network endpoint object direction, just to start by doing that and then creating a controller that does the same thing. I mean, I feel like, we don't have to solve the entire thing, but if we're just looking for research, just starting small and trying to figure out what that is and then going from there.
Well, we've discussed this before. I think it would be driven by use cases, really.
Yep.
What's going to be useful? And I'd want to think it through before hacking much.
Yeah.
At least just at a basic level.
Fair enough.
So, I mean, one testimonial I'll give is at IBM in our VM type stuff, we have a habit of giving 2 attachments to every VM, one on a public network and one on a private network. And it's, as far as what goes into DNS, it's a little bit hellacious. I actually am not very satisfied, but what gets done apparently is for a given DNS name, it gets either public or private address, and someone is making a choice which one goes in as in a given a given domain. And we could model that kind of thing, give control over what goes into DNS. And similarly, we could do the same kind of thing. We give control over what goes into the endpoints.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think we'll probably start, certainly from my perspective, we'll start with something pretty basic and robust. And then we'll be able to look at it and say, given this model, how would we improve it so that we get a more generally useful case? I suspect as soon as we've actually spun something up and tried to put real traffic through and see what breaks and what doesn't, that'll tell us some interesting things. So.
Yeah.
Yep. Let us know.
So, Peter, for that one, you need the network status, right? As a pod annotation work.
Yes, that's right. I don't think I'm actually blocked by that just now, because I think realistically, I'm away for a bit in July, and I've got several other things I need to do along the way before I actually get to worrying about the detailed networking setup. So it's not blocking me for quite some time. By the sound of it, you're going to have that available within, I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth. When do you reckon that's likely to be available?
I am checking the Tableau. Actually, I don't know who took that task, actually.
I mean, the reality is it's not going to block me for at least a month, and probably a good deal longer than that.
Okay.
So I think it's not like I'm going to rush off and do this tomorrow, much though I'd like to. I have things to work on my plate.
Okay, so I think it's in the backlog actually, and I think I didn't move it from there to the in progress status. Maybe we can try to prioritize which that one. Maybe I don't know. What do you guys think?
That, right? We got to evaluate that. I think that is a more generic question we need to answer. We need to think about what's next, right? Now that we have this POC in first phase for our implementation, what are the things that people care about that really they want to see added to the implementation? I think right now we're thinking, result object, right? We're thinking, what else, right? What are the things people care about or want to see?
So my case is the user space one, but it's quite far away actually. So I don't want to comment on that.
I meant realistically, right?
Okay.
So if there are feedback, certainly, right? We want that.
Do you guys think we put something in the documentation and post it and see that what people wants, maybe the requirements or something use cases?
Okay, sure. I think perhaps what we can do is we can come up with a list of candidates, right?
Mhm.
You know, maybe some backlog items. We can list them, and then we can vote on, you know, which one people want more, right?
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Sure. So we got 5 minutes left. Shall we wrap it up?
Yeah. The one last question I had is like in the previous meeting, you took a AR to look into the kubelet config file. But if you remember in the previous meeting,
Yeah, and I did see that. I
I was
have not done anything about that yet.
Yeah, I just want to precautious that I don't know, like it will be acceptable by the Kubernetes SIG community. Actually, maybe we can find some other solution. Instead of changing the kubelet, I was thinking some other solution we can go forward, because changing the kubelet is never going to happen. So that's what I'm thinking. That
I wouldn't say never. I mean, it might be worthwhile trying to propose an option for kubelet to specify which network to pick up from etccni.net.d, which would solve most of the problems. So, I mean, maybe it gets shut down, maybe it doesn't, but it might be worth bringing that up again.
okay, cool.
All right. With that, I don't think there's anything else. So see everybody in 2 weeks.
All right.
And that would be same time, same place, June 21st.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Sure.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.